Well, collectors, here we are. We're still hunkered down, and I know you are too, but welcome to this third essay seminar video, and this time we're going to do the RZM. But before we get to that, I thought you just might enjoy looking at a couple of other things and maybe hearing a little bit of history. I'm no professor or learned student or anything like that, but if you read some of the history from the period and before, it'll give you a lot better view as well as satisfaction in knowing what you're collecting and why it exists. So we'll just do a little of that. I'll just show you, I think Robbie, our great photographer here, he never gets any credit, and he does all this photography at the shows and whatnot. And at our last SOS show, we bought this wonderful carved boar, just fantastic. I love it. And it was once the property of Hermann Goering and was in Karen Hall. There's his coat of arms on the front of it. Isn't he a great looking thing in all of his ugliness? I just think it's a wonderful item, and I just had to put it into my collection, so it made it up to my collecting room. So I hope you guys can like this guy too. He's some pig, I'll tell you. And so we'll walk over here a little bit further into the room. You guys know I have my whole collection in here, and some very beautiful things. But as I said, I want to talk to you a little bit about history first. And we'll come over here to my fireplace. And we'll just start out by saying that maybe Bismarck was one of the most influential people in Germany, becoming what it was during the Kaiser's time as well as Hitler's time, and maybe even today. But Bismarck was considered Germany's greatest statesman. And you have to remember that Germany was not a country until 1870. Up to that time, Germany consisted of a lot of little states that were all ruled by the local family rulers. States like Anhalt and Bavaria and Prussia, Württemberg, all those places. And they all had boundary lines between their sister states. And of course they insisted on collecting tolls anytime anybody went across their state line. And there was a lot of bitterness and jealousy between some states and other states. And for some reason, even though these people were all ethnic Germans, they all spoke the same language, they all had pretty much the same traditions, they were not a country. And then in 1870, Germany and France could not get along, which they really never have gotten along. I don't know why that is. The Borscht, the French called them, but in 1870, through Bismarck, Germany decided to go to war against France. And what they did, which was extremely significant, was for the first time in their history, I mean, Germany had fought a lot of successful wars going back to Frederick the Great's time in the 1760s and 1770s, but in 1870, Bismarck was able to rally all of the German states together, and as one, they fought France, better known as the Franco-Prussian War. And the good part was they won that war, and it was a huge success, and because of the fact that they won the war, Germany decided that finally they were going to become one country, which they did. and they decided that their king was going to be Kaiser Wilhelm I, who was king of Prussia, Prussia being the biggest state in Germany. For those of you that don't know what Prussia is, it was the area which is now the Berlin area, but in those days it encompassed part of Poland, and it was a fairly huge place. So believe it or not, Germany had the nerve to go to France, to Versailles, and crown Prince Wilhelm I, Kaiser of Germany. So there came the Kaisers of Germany, and of course you know, after Kaiser Wilhelm I, his son Ferdinand, who only lived 90 days, he apparently was a cigar smoker, and he died of cancer after 90 days. I guess I should take heed of that. And then this was all in 1888, and then Kaiser Wilhelm II came in as the head. And also the Kaiser made a big mistake. He relieved Bismarck of his duties at that point, and then went on to kind of create World War I. But anyhow, that's very important history, because it was the beginning of the actual country of Germany. Obviously, the people were extremely militarized because of the hundreds of years of wars, most of them successful. And anybody in Germany that wanted to be respected wore some kind of a uniform. Even if you were just a postmaster, it didn't matter. When you went out on the park on Sundays to strut around, every man wore a uniform. So militarism was very much in the minds of the Germans. But one thing I want to talk about, and you guys might really hate this, and I don't blame you if you do, but Richard Wagner was a very, very important person in the history of Germany. As you probably know, he was a composer of operas, and his stuff was absolutely fantastic. Many of his operas were based on the old legends and folklore that the German people came from the Norsemen, and that the Nordic gods and all the rituals and all of the secret things that went along with it were something that the Germans somehow inherited. And Wagner took this premise, and one of his most successful series of operas consisted of 4 operas. Das Rheingold, which meant the gold in the Rhine River. Der Valkyrie, you collectors have heard of the Valkyrie in the sky. And then the third one was Siegfried. And then the last one was Götterdämmerung, which was the death of Siegfried. But these operas, I mean, it was a long time ago. They were first written in the 1870s and the 1880s. But remember then, there was no radio, there was no television, there was no records, there was nothing. If you wanted to hear any kind of music or be entertained, you went to the opera. So these operas were tremendously successful. They were like Elvis Presley or the Beatles or Lenny Kilmister in the Motorhead, if you will. All those kind of things, because that's what they had in those days. And the Germans, they watched these operas, and they saw how Wagner had symbolized these figures in the plays to have inherited the culture of the Norsemen. So to a degree, German people actually believed that some of this may have existed. And a lot of this made it easy for Hitler to invent this so-called master race, because there was already kind of a belief in this kind of thing. You know, when you think you're great people, and the Germans thought they were pretty great. Their craftsmanship was tremendous. They won many, many wars. They had great work ethics. Fathers passed down to the sons the crafts. They had a great country. They really did. So just to show you how some of this symbolism from Wagner, and by the way, there's lots of other operas too, that Der Meistersinger von Nuremberg, Tannhäuser, The Flying Dutchman. You've all heard these operas as the backgrounds in movies that we see today, because they're so tremendous, and they're also in TV shows. You probably don't know they come from Wagner, but if you could just, you know, get a CD, or you guys that know how to download music, and just listen to some of it. You may hate it. You may listen to it and go, oh God, but I'll tell you what, if you listen to it 2 or 3 times, suddenly you'll say, wow, this stuff is pretty good. And I'm already familiar with it and didn't know it. And I think you'll find that. But enough of that, and I just want to show you a painting that to me is extremely symbolic of what I'm saying. This painting was done about 1905, and what you see in the painting is a blacksmith with an anvil and a hammer, and he's handing a sword to a woman in military garb. See, she has a garde du corps style hat. And then there's, of course, a loving dog looking up at the blacksmith. Okay, that's what you see in the painting, but what's really in the painting is that the blacksmith, that is Bismarck. Bismarck was being compared to Siegfried. In the opera Siegfried, Siegfried was a blacksmith, and he repaired his father Wotan's sword. And when the sword blade was repaired, Siegfried inherited the powers of Wotan. So they've taken Bismarck and projected him as Siegfried. And then he's, of course, has a sword, which further symbolizes it. And he's giving the sword to who they called Germania in Germany in those days, a female figure that represented the heroics of the country. Maybe it's all a little bit like the Statue of Liberty. But Germania in this case is Broomhilda, who was in the Ride of Valkyrie. So, you know, it's very, very symbolic. And of course the dog looking up and loving it all. So these are the kind of things that the German people were very used to looking at, and it made them feel like they came from something important. So you can see how easy, or it gave a little bit of ease to Hitler to twist all that into saying that you guys are a master race. It's very easy to influence people when the background is like that. And of course, with the getting all the young boys into the Hitler Youth and raising them, you know the rest of the story. But you can see how the seeds were set there. So again, Wagner, listen to it. It's very enjoyable, and it'll give you a little more perspective into the things that we collect and why they exist as they do today. So on that note, we'll get back to what I'm really about, which is daggers and swords, but I just wanted to take a minute for that. Okay, we're going to head down to the pool room now, where we can do the little lecture on the RZM. So we just go this way. I always love to look at my stuff. Every day I come in every morning and look at it. It's wonderful things. All right, we'll see you down in the pool room. Well, we're still not at the pool table yet, but I don't think you collectors have seen some of the things, doodads that I have around my house. In the downstairs, there's nothing from the Third Reich. You know, you don't want the mailman walking in and thinking, oh God, what do we got here? So it's mostly imperial things, but I love them just as much as the other items. This wonderful painting we're looking at here, this young fella here was a member of the Garde du Corps, and the Garde du Corps were the Kaiser's personal guard, and they were mostly sons of wealthy men, and in fact you had to submit a financial statement so that they could make sure you could afford the uniforms. But in the instance of this fella, he's got the beautiful Garde du Corps helmet on, and the cuirass of the Garde du Corps with the tunic underneath, and then he's grasping his Garde du Corps sword, which is a cuirassier type, meant for cavalry. And I think the reason that this painting was commissioned is because this young fella is wearing a second-class Iron Cross. And that was a big deal in World War I. By the way, this painting was done in 1915. So his parents were probably so thrilled that he was awarded the second-class Iron Cross that they had the painting done in order to commemorate the occasion. But isn't it a wonderful piece of art? It's in the original frame too, which somehow has lasted all these years. And next to our guard is a bronze that I love very much. This is a bronze of Ferdinand, who was Kaiser Wilhelm I's son, the one I spoke of upstairs a minute ago, who was the unfortunate cigar smoker. He became Kaiser around he did in 1888 was when he became Kaiser, and he only lived 90 days. So we don't see a lot of bronzes of Ferdinand. So this one I'm particularly proud of. He has his sword and his cap in his hand, and he was a very learned person too, very intelligent person, and maybe it's a shame that he didn't live longer. He might have brought Germany into a better atmosphere than the one that caused World War I under his son, Kaiser Wilhelm II. So we'll look at some other things too. This is another bronze that I particularly like. It's very, very beautiful. It depicts Hermann. Hermann was a barbarian from about 500 AD, and he is credited with throwing the Romans out of Germany. He's still very well thought of today in Germany, and you can see the dagger that he's holding is somewhat similar to an SA dagger, and in the bronze at the bottom he's stamping all over the Roman artifacts. You can see the eagle here with the SPOR that the Romans used. That's all broken up, and it's very symbolic and a great piece. It literally it weighs a ton. It's from the 1880s. And I'll show you on the other side of the room here. I hope you can see this. Unfortunately, the light above the bulb is burnt out, but this is one of the most beautiful cigar boxes I've ever seen. It's all hand carved, absolutely gorgeous wood, and the god of the Rhine on the top guarding the box with a lion next to him. and then it opens up from the front, and there's a few good cigars in there in case I run short. And then I'll show you another painting over here. Get this light out of the way, or maybe put it on the painting. Now here you can see this is a painting of an American airman from 1917 who went to France because he wanted to fly. America wasn't in the war yet, and a lot of American flyers did that. He's a very young, handsome man. I just wonder whether he survived, I don't know. And he's unusual too in that he's still a sergeant, not an officer, and usually only officers were flyers, but perhaps he was promoted later. And it's also interesting that the set of wings that the flyer is wearing are what we call Dallas wings. The regular wings that the Army made that were issued weren't very fancy, and a lot of airmen bought Dallas wings. And here's a set below that I acquired to kind of show with the painting. And they're very hard to find, they're very rare, but extremely beautiful. See the highlights of the metal in them and how great they were. So a very interesting, beautiful painting that I really enjoy. And the last thing that I want to show you in this room, during these lectures, some of the light has been provided gratis Heinrich Himmler. This beautiful chandelier is one of 23 that comes from Himmler's castle Wewelsburg. As you guys probably know, Himmler renovated this castle beginning in 1936 so that he could use it for his secret rituals. And they had a dining table with 12 chairs where certain SS Gruppenführer were knighted and given coats of arms and all this kind of occult and things that Himmler was interested in. But when you look at the chandelier, it's really, really beautiful. It depicts three men holding up the centerpiece in the Third Reich manner, and then with the struts coming out that hold the bulbs. When I originally acquired the chandelier, somebody had taken the bulbs out and stuffed wax in there. They were burning candles in it. I had all that removed and had the lamp taken apart and cleaned and rewired so that I could use it in my house. But of course I can get away with it because who's going to know what it is? Only I know what it is. So, but what a fantastic thing, huh? Can you imagine? So that's just some of the things around the house, and I guess now it's high time we start with the lecture on the RZM. Okay. All right, we'll open this essay lecture first with trying to answer a couple of questions that I've gotten on the email. One collector, he heard me talking about SS daggers having Rohm's signature and in heartfelt comradeship, and he said, well, why would Rohm be on SS daggers? That doesn't make sense. Well, collectors, you have to remember that Rohm was in charge of not only the SA, but also the SS. And the SS was a comparatively small body that just acted as Hitler's bodyguard during the middle 20s up to the late 20s and early 30s. So it was a relatively small group of people at the time, but Rohm was in charge. Himmler in 1929 was in charge of the SS. He was the Reichsführer then, but it was under Rohm's control. And after the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler declared the SS as a separate organization with Himmler at its head, and that's when Himmler went to organizing all the police and the Gestapo and all of the other things that came that put fear into the German people. And incidentally, he was also given the right to create an armed SS, the Waffen-SS, which is what Rome had always wanted, but Hitler didn't trust him with it, where he did trust Himmler. So that's a little bit about that. And then another question that I get is, well, you talk about SA daggers and you talk about Rome and all, and what happened to Rome's SA dagger? So I thought I would dig into this subject just a little bit, because there's very few pictures of Rome with his dagger, and that's because he probably didn't get the dagger until May or June of 1934, and then a month later he was killed. But the pictures, there are a few pictures that we do have that kind of shows it, and we'll look at this one here. This is Rome in all of his glory here. He looks pretty good in the photograph. You don't even see some of his battle scars and so forth, and his uniform looks immaculate, and obviously a staged photo, but you can see that he's wearing a special dagger. And we took the liberty of making some close-ups of this, and you'll see here, look at the chain. Instead of a leather chain like all the other SA people, he had a fancy metal chain here of metal links, and what I call the snout nose clip. You can tell by how the end thins, but also this clip was highly decorated. You can also notice that the scabbard was leather covered, and it had really beautiful lines that followed the length of the leather. We can see that a little bit in this other picture. See those beautiful lines? What a fantastic scabbard. And then with this shot, you can also pick up, there is a little detail in this snap clip. You can see it's raised out with a pattern of perhaps oak leaves. And then you also see that it looks like there's some kind of cross batons that are raised out of the upper fitting of the scabbard. And you can see the scabbard mounts have oak leaves on them, but the oak leaves are a little different pattern than what we see with the honor daggers. And then, of course, as I said, because Rome was in charge of both organizations at the time, the SA runes at the top and the SS runes at the bottom. This was a special dagger made for him. It wasn't one of the prototypes because the eagle appears the same as the standard eagles. Now here we have another shot where Hitler is chewing out Rome or whatever, and Rome's all duded up, and he's got this special dagger on. And in this photograph you get the hint of something else going on with the fittings on the dagger, of the scabbard especially, and we have a close-up of that. Now the chain is here because the dagger must have been shaking when the photographer took the picture. It's not clear, but you can see that the links also had some kind of decoration on them. And if you look closely at these, you can see that the cross guards are absolutely fantastic. The oak leaving comes over to the upper portion of the cross guards, and the same on the upper cross guard. You can see that it also had decoration on the top. And the tang nut also appears to have had a swastika on it. And then looking further too, there is definitely some type of an oak leaf panel on the bottom scabbard. So those are the only pictures I know of that at least give us a hint of what Rome's dagger was. So collectors ask, well, where the hell is it? You know, it's a hard thing to say. Obviously, anything to do with Rome was verboten, and it is possible that they destroyed his dagger along with everything else that had anything to do with him. But just knowing the Germans the way I do, I just feel that somebody put that in a drawer. There's always rumors that Goering took it for his own purposes. I don't know. It's never been discovered yet. Who knows, maybe it's in some veteran's attic today. The blade on the Rohm dagger, of course, it probably was most certainly some type of beautiful Damascus. And just from thinking myself, I think there would have been a dedication on the back, probably from the city of Zolligen, because remember, if it weren't for Rome, they wouldn't have gotten that huge order for daggers that literally brought the city back to life again. So they must have been deeply in Rome's debt, and it wouldn't be too much to imagine that they would have this beautiful custom dagger made for Rome. But that's, you know, just my thinking, and gosh, I hope someday it turns up. A dagger like that today would probably be worth $1 million, especially if it's still in good condition. So that's all I can tell you about Rome with his connection with the SS and his dagger, and I hope that answers the questions that you guys that wrote me had. So now we talked about early daggers and how great they were made and custom made and beautiful materials and all of the things that went into making one of those daggers. And we also talked about trademarks a little bit, and it can't be overstressed how much a trademark meant to a blade company. Remember, a lot of these guys, their companies went back for generations, 100 years, even 200 years, sometimes even longer. And they all adopted a trademark or a logo, if you will, that had some kind of a significance to either their family, on something their family may have made or did, something their family was famous for, or they just took their initials and cleverly intertwined them, or in some cases they formed the logo out of their name. There's a logo of a company, Bruken, their name is, it makes SA daggers, and their logo is a bridge. Oh, Bruken is a bridge in Germany, so they took the name of their company and used it as a logo. But all the sweat and tears and years of producing either scissors or razors or silverware or swords or daggers or whatever the hell they did, their logo was always there and it meant a lot. I mean, can you imagine saying to Coca-Cola, we're going to nationalize the Coca-Cola bottling company and you can't have your name anymore. Well, just think of the importance of names and logos. And the same was true with the Germans. So in comes the RZM. And you say, well, what is the RZM? Well, the Reich Zug Ministry, it was really a huge bureaucracy that was in charge of ordnance. And what that meant was they were in charge of anything that was made to be used, to be worn, to be flown by members of party organizations. You know, the Hitler Youth, the SA, the SS, the Frauenschaft, the DAF, and there's lots of other little organizations that were affiliated with the party, but they wanted control of everything that was made for the party so that it could be made right according to their tastes, according to the materials that they prescribed, It was a very important thing in Germany that the party have total control over everything. So, thus the RZM. Now, if you were a blade company, or you made buttons, or you made leather straps, or you made hangers, you made uniforms, you made flags, armbands, all of these things were items that were used by the party, even down to tinnies. We call them tinnies. They were day badges that were made up for rallies and parades that came up during the time, and they handed out all these little badges, and we see thousands of them today. Most of them are, you know, they're $30, $40 items, but they signify the event that was taking place. And since it was under the guise of the NSDAP, the RZM had to be involved, and you actually had to submit a drawing or a replica of the day badge that you were going to produce 3 months before the event, and if you didn't have the approval, you couldn't produce it. And the same was true with the blade producers in Solingen. The party wanted to control the way the daggers were made, the standards they were made, the distribution, all of these things, the payment. It was all headed up by Franz Schurz, who was the party treasurer. And I also think the RZM may have been a way to capture a lot more money to the party. And if you were a blade maker and you wanted to participate in making these items for party organizations, you had to have the approval of the RZM. And it was a big deal to get it too. A lot of things you had to conform to, and payments and so forth and so on. And they personally had to approve everything that you made, the design, the materials, etc. And because of that, and because of the way of thinking then, individuality was not high on the scale in the Nazi philosophy. If you were in the Nazi party, everything you did, wore, thought, all had to be the same. So this is why the RZM came into effect, and they went to the blade companies after they were approved. The companies would be assigned a number. It would be something like RZM M7/66 as an example, which was the Eichhorn code. RZM, I told you what that meant. The M was a repetitive of RZM, and the 7 was the number assigned to blade makers, and then the next number, 2 or 3, whatever digits it were, was the number that was assigned to that particular RZM maker. And then sometimes you'll see the date after that also. And the RZM did not really want logos to be used. So the blade companies in 1936, when the RZM was first really inserting its force, the organization was created in 1929, but it wasn't until 1936 that they really started to grab a hold of the blade makers. So the companies must have screamed murder and said, well, we don't want to lose our logo. It's so important to us. So the RZM said, okay, we'll let you use your logo, but you still have to have the RZM mark on it too. And they said, okay. So for a couple of years that was done. And then by about 1938, the logo was gone and just the RZM markings were there. So what we see with these things, I'll show you, some of the logos that were so important to people. Here we have the famous PAC logo, and I talked about the opera Siegfried upstairs a little while ago. And what Siegfried's doing here, a lot of people say, oh, he's got a sword in his hand, or I don't know what the heck he's doing. Actually, there'd be an anvil here, but they didn't put the anvil in. And Siegfried is welding he's hammering a huge hammer, and it's significant of him fixing Wotan's sword. So a very important logo that was recognizable by most Germans because they knew about Wagner's Siegfried. Here we have an interesting logo that a lot of collectors write me, what the heck is this thing? It's a very cleverly done logo. I have to look at the back of the photograph here to get it right. Oops, let me get this back in order here. The producer's name was Cadell and Rao. And what they did with their logo was combine this K and R in a very stylistic manner and put a little crown above it. But yeah, it's a very, very clever and very interesting logo. Very collectible too. I love it. Then you had other producers. Here's the famous Wusthof. And collectors write me and say, oh yeah, it's a guy, he looks like he's working a pump, or he's got a stick in his hand or something. Well, really what this is, in northern Germany, and where they bordered Holland, there was a lot of streams that ran through the farms, and the bridge may only be every quarter mile or so, so you're out in the field working, and who the heck wants to walk all the way up there to go to the bridge just across this little 3-foot stream? So what these were is actually poles for pole vaulting. So that's what you see in this logo. And apparently this company may have had a farm with that type of operation and liked that usage. The other mark here, see what this is. Yeah, this is Karl Malsch, and here they've used an ellipse form and just cleverly made their name and location in it. But it still would be a logo that you could identify just by looking at it rather than reading it. And some of the great marks that we see, which have become very collectible over the years, the famous Aesculap. You can see on Aesculap they used a caduce as their logo, which is a medical sign with a crown above it. And as you say, well, why the heck would they do that? Well, because Aesculap was famous for making surgical tools. So this was easily incorporated into their logo. And you have Eppenstein here that has some kind of a crown with big feathers going out of it. Felix, it looks like a hanging lamp. I'm not sure what that one is. And then the famous Rudolf Schmidt with the rag doll. Isn't that enticing? That's a dagger you can buy and usually show your wife, and she'll actually like it because of the rag doll. So that's a good one to try to get. Some others here that we see. There's Ed Oliger with some kind of a jar that's lighting up. I don't know what the significance that is. And Kuhler has a eagle that very much resembles an American eagle. And then the famous Spitzer with the lion prancing with his tongue out and his tail up in the air. Great stuff. Some other interesting ones. Gebruder Burns. They have an otter eating a fish. I don't know what the significance that is, but it must have been something. Becker. They have a chef holding up a butcher knife and a fork. Maybe they had a restaurant or something along with the blade business. I don't know. Albert Dorschel, an anchor with the S going through it indicating Soligen. And then, of course, the famous Arthur Schüttelhofer, known as Azo, the crossed hobby horses, another great logo. And this is one of my favorites of all, Herder and Son, and they're featuring Diogenes holding a light. Now, for you guys that don't know who Diogenes is, he was a Greek philosopher, and he was blind, and he spent his whole life looking for an honest man. Sounds like somebody we could use in the hobby, doesn't it? But a great logo. Diogenes. Terrific. Okay, so then we get to the RZM when they first come into play. And I told you that you'll see a lot of pieces that have both the logo and the RZM code. So on this piece, it's nothing fancy, but it was the Louder Young Company, and you can see their RZM above it with their code M7 being a blade maker, and the number assigned to them was number 6. This is the famous Eichhorn. This is a 1938 date logo where they were still using their squirrel logo with the RZM code above it. RZM on Eichhorn is always a single circle with the RZM inside. Some of the circles are burnished inside, or they're double circles, and they differ quite a bit. There's a closer shot of what that Eichhorn looked like. But you can see they didn't want to lose this. They were famous for this. Not this, they were famous for this. Now I want to show you the way the companies changed a little bit with their adoption of both the logo and the RZM code. In this instance, one dagger is dated 1939. That's this piece, and the other dagger is dated 1941. The etches, the position of the etches changes slightly, probably because they used a different etcher at that time. Here's the famous Klitterman and Moog, the arm holding a spear. And when you look at this, it has the RZM code M729, 1940. This was confusion for many years. M729 used to be on SS daggers with the exclamation point after the motto, and we all thought that a company named Jacobs made them because they were assigned the number M729 early on in the RZM. But apparently Jacobs did something to screw up. Maybe the RZM came out to inspect. They didn't like what they saw and they pulled their license or whatever. And it wasn't until about 1938 that Jacobs got back into the RZM, but not with the 729 number. That was given to Klitterman and Moog. So now we know it was really Klitterman and Moog that made the daggers with the exclamation point. So these things can be important to the hobby. Here we are. Here is Jacobs with their new number. You can see their number now is M7118, a pretty large number, which shows the number of years it took them to get back into the RZM. So that's a neat thing too. The two RZMs together, they prove what I'm talking about. Here's the Tiger firm on 1 year. Let's see, well, they don't have the years on them, but the years must have changed because they got a different etcher. He moved the Tiger up a little further, and they changed the look of the RZM. See how it's shaded on this one? And it's just a single circle on that one. Kind of interesting. This is the famous Henkel's firm, and you see the same kind of stuff happening here. One logo still has the twins on it, or has the twins on it. This one has the full logo with the twins, and maybe they were complaining and they let them keep the twins and the RZM together. That's probably a transitional type of a marking. This one, let's see, this is Wilhelm Wagner, and again they changed etchers at one time because everything's moved around. By the way, collectors, it took me years and years to find these daggers to make these photographs. So don't think that this is just trivial stuff. You could spend a lifetime looking for these kind of things. So it's kind of cool to be able to see it all in one shot here. This is the famous Anton Wingen firm, and these are all the, let's see what year they start. They start in 1938 and run up to 1941 every year. And somehow they were able to keep their little knight in their logo. I don't know how they were able to do that, but they must have known somebody in the RZM. This is a company that we don't see very often. M7104. This company was based in Austria, so we don't see very many daggers coming from that area. So these are very interesting and probably a little bit valuable if you happen to acquire one. You'll almost never see it because they made very, very few daggers. And then here we go to Herder. Everybody knows Richard Abwehr Herder with the diamond. Here they were able to use their diamond trademark with the RZM code below, and I'm showing you 1939 and 1940 together. You can see they're pretty much the same, but a little bit different, so they probably used a different etcher in those years. Here's Wingen again. These are the 1938 and 39 of Wingen. Let's see who this is. That's Wingen again. They're just close-ups of those. And then the famous F.W. Huller. Huller, of course, used the thermostat or thermometer as their logo inside of double ovals, and with the RZM underneath. And the Herder logos, you can count the number of digits in the thermometer if your eyes are good enough, and sometimes you can tell the year the item was made by the amount of digits in the thermometer. That's true on armies and Luftwaffe daggers. Let's see what this is. This is Arthur Everett's that you don't see too much. And this is Louder Young. We saw one of those before. That's Louder Young again. And well, whatever, but you guys got the idea here. This is Puma class. This one is, Krebs. So you can see what it was all about here. Gives you pretty good insight into what they were doing. So, for the most part, it's worth saying that if you were custom ordering a piece, a special order piece, for the most part, the RZM was not involved. Usually you could order that directly from the factory. But even in some cases, the RZM obviously got involved too, because here's a special Damask blade produced by the Eichhorn firm, and sure enough, there's the RZM above the trademark. All right, we were talking about how the RZM sometimes got involved with special order pieces. And I just showed you an Eichhorn Damask piece, and here's a Damascus piece made by Henkel's. If you look close, you can see the twins logo there in the Damascus blade with the RZM. So it shows that the RZM's fingers were reaching pretty far. When the RZM daggers were produced and ready for shipment, sometimes, not all the time, they had a tag on their grip designating the RZM specifications, and sometimes they were in bags also. This is a piece from Richard Abwehr Herder, where even the bag with the seal of the company is there along with the tag. This one shows a dagger from RZM M91, and the bag behind it, S.A. Dolch, was printed on it with the RZM number and of course the number on the blade. The Eichhorn usually came in a bag, and they also had an issue tag with them. Here's a nice one that shows the bag, and this is the tissue paper that was inside of the bag. And with the tag here, it has the RZM number on there, looks like M72. And if you look real closely, there's even a tag on the hanger. Remember, hangers were made for the party, so that those producers had to be also approved by the RZM, and their code number instead of 7 was M5. See here, you can see that RZM tag on the hanger a little better. That's another grip tag from the back. These were the wraparound kind, and the other types were riveted on. You see both types. There's the other side of this same tag with the M72, which would have been Emmelvoos. And now that we're talking about all this, I have to mention too that when the RZM came in, they felt that the amount of money that was being spent on political daggers was too costly. Nickel silver fittings and very, very nice fancy wood grips and so-called anodized. By the way, anodized has nothing to do with the subject matter. It's just a term that the hobby picked up. Anodized is just for aluminum. But it was a blued surface that was on the scabbard, and this was a lot of work to do, and it didn't hold up well. Other things, the blades were made much better on early daggers. So the RZM decided to completely standardize it and at the same time cheapen the materials slightly. So what you have is an early dagger where you have these beautiful nickel silver fittings, beautiful hand fit here. This example is an Asculip. And they incidentally varnished their grips. A lot of collectors write, "Oh, I bought this dagger by this East-Lopper or something company, and it's got paint or varnish all over the grip. Should I take it off?" Of course not. It was made that way. And the anodized scabbard and the nice nickel silver fittings, the nice nickel silver hanger, and the blades were generally just very, very beautiful. All hand done. And then when we come to the RZM, what they instituted was, let's do away with the nickel silver stuff. It's too expensive. Let's start making cross guards out of a pot metal or zinc, and we'll nickel plate them. Nobody's going to know the difference when the dagger's new anyhow. So they adopted that. And they went to grips that were, they have usually a much higher center ridge, and not this real kind of fine wood. They almost have a production look to them. And a lot of times they'll see they're not as well fit as the other ones because the cross guards were standardized. Most of them were all the same size. Instead of the anodized scabbard, they were painted. Instead of nickel silver scabbard mounts, they were steel nickel plated. And by the way, a magnet can be your best friend in this hobby. You just touch a magnet to the fittings on the scabbard, and zinc, it grabs right away, whereas it will not on the nickel one. So you want to see a plated fitting on your RZM dagger. And at the same time, the hangers were also cheapened up. These clips are nickel plated and an RZM number of the manufacturer on the back of the clip. And then the blades generally had a little higher ridge than the earlier ones. They were still very, very nicely made, but just not quite the same quality as the early examples. And then of course you'll have the RZM details on the reverse of the blade, whereas the maker logo was on the early pieces. And just to show you, I'm not wolfing you here on these pictures. This is the type of grip tag that went around the grip. I have it covered in plastic because I don't want somebody grabbing it and ripping the thing. Also, what they did too was they did away with the nickel eagles, solid nickel ones, and used a lot of aluminum eagles, which were also controlled by the RZM because it was a part made for a party organization. Also, you'll see a lot of eagles that were copper and then silver plated. Some are just pot metal that were silver plated, but the plating came off. The copper ones that you see generally were nickel plated, and the nickeling came off of the finish. So that's kind of what you see, and with the cheapening of the fittings, it was a hell of a lot easier to fit a blade into a crossguard that was cut out already. See there, you didn't have to bother with the blade shoulders because it was already covered by the crossguard. Not all RZM crossguards are made like that, but some of them are, and people say, "Oh, somebody cut this out." No, no, no. It was made that way. So you'll see things like that. You'll also see this is a tang nut from an RZM dagger. You don't see this shape very often, but every once in a while you'll see it, and oh my God, what is that? That can't be real. Well, it is, and you can see it's pot metal, and it's shaped downward like this, so it was much easier to install. You didn't have to fiddle around with trying to find the hole and the threads and so forth. So that's some of the things that you see. And now before I leave the subject, I want to give you some hints about buying an SA dagger, and I like to compare it to sort of a squirrel on a branch that he's never been on before. I'm sure you guys have watched squirrels before, and they jump on the branch and they stand there and they look around a little bit, and then they move up a little bit more and they look up in the air, or probably looking for a snake or something. Then they go up a little further and they shake their tail and they fool around. They might take a bite out of a leaf, or again, maybe there's a falcon in the area and they're worried about him scooping them up. But a squirrel is going to become familiar with that branch before he runs up and down it. The same thing is true if you're going to buy a dagger. There's a lot of things to look at before you make a decision on a dagger. Most of it is instantaneous, and you'll say, "Oh, Whitman, you're wasting our time with this." But it's very important to follow these steps, especially if you're a new person coming into the hobby. So if you take an SA dagger, the first thing you're going to look at, you're the squirrel on the branch. What's a tang nut look like? Well, you got to, let's see, are the fittings nickel silver? Oh, well then the tang nut should be nickel silver. So you'll be able to see, does the tang nut match the metal color of the crossguard? If it doesn't, and you get your magnet out and dink, it sticks to your metal, your magnet, then you know that more than likely the tang nut's been replaced. You can also look at the wrench grooves on the bottom of the tang nut, because that'll tell you whether the dagger's ever been taken apart, because there's always going to be some traces that are wrench leaves. And lots of times you'll see circles that run around the tang nut that are in the metal of the crossguard. You know what that is? Some character took the nut off with a wrench that was too big and scored the whole top of the crossguard. You don't want that. You don't want that. Now, if it's an early dagger, you're going to go down to the bottom crossguard, and you're going to want to turn it over and see, does it have a grouper mark on it? You know, 99% of the early daggers were distributed to SA groups, so they'll have this stamping. Some early daggers will not. Those are the ones that were probably specially given to big shots, or they didn't go through the normal cycle. We see a lot of Rohm daggers, for instance, that don't necessarily have group marks. And then you want to, after that, look at the grip. Has the grip got a crack in it? Is there a chip in it? Is it all beat to hell? If it still has its nice graceful lines and nice center ridge, and it flows right into the cross guards and fits perfectly, that's what you want to see. On RZM daggers, because the metal was plated on the bottom of the cross guard, a lot of times you'll see that the metal is lifting where it meets the grip. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's because there was moisture in the grip and it went down into the metal and caused that. On early daggers, you're not going to see that because they're nickel silver and not subject to rust. So okay, you better look at the eagle too. If it's an early dagger, you don't want to see an aluminum eagle in it. And if it's a late dagger, you really don't want to see an aluminum eagle either. So these are things that you should keep in mind. Next, you go to the scabbard. Does the throat of the scabbard meet in the same bow that the crossguard is in? You know, if there's a big gap between the two, you could probably think, hey, either somebody changed the scabbard fitting or maybe somebody changed the scabbard. That's an important thing. Then you want to look at the scabbard surface. If it's an RZM, you want to see a painted surface. If it's earlier, you want to see an anodized surface. Now, there's some exceptions to all of this too. There are daggers that are an in-between period where manufacturers used up the parts they have. Sometimes you might find a nickel throat in an RZM dagger. That's just because they had the throat left over and they used it there. Every once in a while you'll see nickel fittings on an RZM dagger with plated scabbard fittings. Again, they were just, they're transposition, but you have to look at the whole dagger to get that feel for what you are. So once you got through the scabbard shell, you want to look at the scabbard fittings. Is the ball nice? You know, a lot of balls got crushed all the time and split and so forth. Not much we can do about that. But gee, if it has a nice ball, that's certainly a plus. Feel the screws. When you feel the screws, you can feel whether they're unturned just by feeling them. A screwdriver buggers them up and you'll feel the buggering right away. I mean, okay, somebody took the scabbard fittings apart. It's not the worst thing in the world. But isn't it more fun to have a dagger where the screws have never been removed? And then lastly, well, look at the hanger too. If your dagger is an early dagger, you want these fittings to be early also, nickel silver. If they touch to a magnet, they're plated, and plated fittings don't necessarily go with early daggers. That's important stuff. And then the blade, of course, you want to, as you draw it out, that's another thing. You're still on this branch, you're the squirrel, and you pull this out. Does it come out nice? Do you feel obstructions rubbing against the blade when you pull it out? You know, inside the scabbard there's runners, and there's also a lead weight at the bottom. If the lead weights come loose, the dagger tip is going to stick into the weight, and that's why some daggers are hard to pull. Oh, you finally get it out because the point's stuck in the lead down the bottom. Sometimes the scabbard runners, the rivets come loose and the runner falls down in the scabbard. Well, the dagger doesn't pull out nice when that happens. And of course you want to look at the condition of the blade and all those things. And then when you put the dagger back, does it go in nice? And does it snap when it goes in? I always like to hear that snap. So if you look at all these things, a lot of it's really trivial, but it really means a lot. Of, you know, if you're spending $1,000 or $10,000 or $200. It's still bucks, and that amount of money means a lot to you. So you want to be sure that you're getting your money's worth. And if you find flaws or things that don't seem exactly right, ask the man about it that's selling it, and if he doesn't have any good answer, ooh, I don't know, that's just the way I got it. You know, maybe you might not want to deal with that dagger. You might want to go on and look at something else, because remember, there was at least 3 million of these things made, so there's a lot of RZM daggers, and you'll always find one you like if you're patient and you go through these steps. So, I don't know, be a squirrel. I know it's silly, but it can really help you, because when you get old like me, and let's say you're going to retire, or let's say you die of smoking or whatever, here's this collection to deal with. Your wife always hated it to begin with, and she's really going to hate it if when it comes time to sell it, it's a bunch of botched up parts, daggers all in bad condition. Or she may be pleasantly surprised because that dagger you told her you bought for $25 at a flea market turns out to be worth $2,500. And it will if you buy the right things, have really good taste, use your head a little bit. It doesn't take a genius to be in this hobby. It just takes a genius to enjoy it, maybe, because it's a tough battle sometimes. People, oh, why do you want to collect it? You know, I don't know why we want to collect it, but we do. We just like it. We're not hurting anybody. We're not into the politics of it. We just like this stuff. Remember, it was made for you to like. That's why they made it, to entice young men to want to join these organizations and really be part of something. Obviously, that something was foul, but the accoutrements and the uniforms and the weapons, you just cannot beat the quality and the good looks of them. So I wish you all well, and let's hope that we can all get out to shows soon and start to enjoy each other's company and the different collectibles we have. So thanks a lot.